Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is part of my series covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. Last time we checked in, it had entered a new era with Banana Blitz, while still keeping its experimental side with fully featured mobile games. And while both of these things had plenty to criticize, there were no signs of slowing down. For more details, check out the playlist. But for now, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. One of the best things about sequels is that the more you can reuse, the more time you have to iterate, and perhaps counterintuitively, make something new. That goes double if you reuse an engine. Perhaps one of the most famous examples of this is The Legend of Zelda with Majora's Mask. But the Monkey Ball series was no stranger to the concept either. Monkey Ball 2 built off of 1, while iOS was an evolution of Touch and Roll. So when Sega announced Super Monkey Ball Step and Roll for the Wii in 2009, it wasn't exactly unforeseeable. The series was riding high, and it only made sense to follow up the entry on Nintendo's massive platform. What was surprising though was its new gimmick. In 2008, Nintendo had produced Wii Fit, an exercise-based game which took advantage of the Wii balance board. This new accessory not only worked as a simple bathroom scale, but also detected weight distribution, which a few games used throughout the years. And this technology became the thesis for the newest release in Sega's franchise. Revealed in the summer of 2009 and released the following February, this entry advertised the fun of the Super Monkey Ball series combined with the productivity of exercise. Now, if you're like me, you'd probably have some serious doubts from the start. And the developers even admitted that when the idea was pitched, they were hesitant. But they would explain that as development continued, they not only grew more comfortable with the control scheme, but were even confident that both new and classic era fans would appreciate it. And in the months ahead of its launch, many publications would show faith in this new setup. Well, let's see just what exactly they prepared. For the most part, things are predictably similar when starting the game. An annoying Wii disc menu screen, the strange image before the safety information, and no intro animation to my disappointment. The general art style is pretty similar too. I'm still not a fan of the character designs, but at least the backgrounds are much more detailed than Banana Blitz. Both aim for more abstract scenes than before, but even comparing Monkey Island, there's just more to look at. Special shoutouts to Far East for being one of the most beautiful landscapes I've seen in the series. I wonder if Sega was biased in any way. The next thing I'm obliged to mention is the soundtrack. Outside of the obvious, this is what the game is known for, and for good reason. They switched up the style again from rock to a more general pop. Well, I suppose there is a rock piece, but it's just one of the many genres explored now, including string orchestra, swing jazz, and Asian-influenced dance. They're good pieces for the most part, made extra fun when you realize that each stage progresses the song a little further. By the end, you'll probably be doing your best not to hum along. Until the singing starts. Yeah, as a series first, each world theme also has a vocal track that plays during the credits. However, I didn't really enjoy them. It mostly comes down to the lyrics being poor, or even the singer sometimes not sounding great. Now obviously I understand the demographic they were targeting with these, so I'm not expecting deep, thought-provoking verses. But they often sound awkward, random, or extremely generic. It reminds me of a Kidz Bop album, and completely ruined several songs for me. In fact, the only ones I enjoyed were Guiding Star for its poetics, and the two non-English ones because I couldn't understand them. Otherwise, I simply prefer the instrumental versions. And on that front, I have no complaints. They're really good. Regardless of how you view the vocal tracks though, they mark a unique direction and help separate Step and Roll from its predecessor. Speaking of vocals though, I'd also be remiss to not mention the new narrator. Although not quite as crazy sounding as Brian Matt, this guy sounds genuinely enthusiastic, and I greatly prefer him to the one from Banana Blitz. As for the UI, it's as visually appealing as ever, and I'd even call it an upgrade. However, one small thing I'd change is the timer placement. It's been moved out of the way, presumably to give you more room to see ahead, but I actually think keeping an eye on the clock is a vital part of the game. If you're doing precision work, trying to balance speed and control, you aren't going to want to divert your gaze to the upper corner. Rather, you'll simply want to check your upper vision to judge your progress. It's a somewhat unintuitive factor, but I found myself missing it regardless. Otherwise, I like the adjustments. The menu has a distinct look, striking a balance between clean and fun. I also like how as you move through the different menu levels, certain details will be added or removed from the background. Speaking of which, those are navigated using the D-pad or pointer controls. No twisting required. Thank goodness for that. But you know what they say, beauty is fleeting when you skin it, or something like that. So it's time to get to the meat of things. First of all, Yan Yan and Doctor are absent here, leaving us with just the main cast. However, there is a new tutorial guide named Jam, who not only teaches you the controls, but even provides the descriptions on the menus. That's cute. He's very much on the hyper side, with every control screen ending with some kind of animation. Whether you find him endearing or not will entirely depend on your personality, but I think I find him ironically funny at the least. Anyway, once we train at Jam's dojo, we're taken to the world map. Yup, the main mode is still taking touch and rolls approach, despite it being on a home console. But don't worry, there's a silver lining which we'll get to later. For now though, it's a similar unlock system as the DS. Each world is skill rated 1 to 3 stars. Finish World 1 to unlock the 2-star areas, then finish one of those to unlock the 3rd tier. And finally, clearing all 6 will unlock the secret 7th area, which it claims to be a 5-star difficulty. With 10 levels per world, that's 70 levels total. A pretty pathetic amount. And here I thought Banana Blitz was lacking. Actually, that's the lowest level count on a home or handheld console. It's lower than Junior, which had 74, and is only beat out by N-Gage with its 50, which you could argue shouldn't even be a point of comparison. Still, quantity is only half the equation, so we'll have to see how the quality holds up. But first, let's rip off the bandage now and talk about the Wii balance board. Where do I even start? I suppose I could just say it's bad, but it wouldn't do the situation justice. Monkey Ball has seen some strange or restrictive control methods in its day, whether it be a D-pad, a touchscreen, or tilt controls. But none were as difficult for me to get started with as the balance board. First of all, despite the name of the game, there's little to no stepping involved. Simply stand on the board with your feet on either side, then lean in the direction you wish to roll. But problem A, it's hard to come to a standstill. Similar to Banana Blitz, you have to be in a very specific position to not move, meaning you'll often be drifting to one side or the other. Problem B, leaning backwards will cause you to do a 180, then immediately swing the camera, which means turning on a dime is also more difficult. Often, I found myself doing a 360-degree turn because I didn't lean forward fast enough after reversing direction. Alternatively, I'd simply try to slow down, only to swivel around and, often disoriented, roll to the side. This not only wastes time, but can prove perilous when rolling near the edge of a stage. Which leads me to problem C. The sensitivity is somewhat awkward. While forward movement is manageable with practice, the X-axis feels way too insensitive. Sure, you can do wide turns without much trouble. In fact, it's fairly difficult to go in a straight line. But anything past a 45-degree angle seems to require extra time. Given the current feel, I can understand why they didn't want to turn the sensitivity up more, because it would probably lead to a lot of frustration when making micro adjustments. But it leads me to the conclusion that it's just a bad controller in general, and is little more than a novelty. It's not even a good one either. With all the other weird methods, I could at least get used to how they worked, or at the very least see the hypothetical benefit. Even tilt controls could be reliably used to an extent, though obviously not as much as the analog stick. But here, I was really struggling for the first several worlds. And then I found a workaround. By placing the board close to the TV, I could use my hands to lean forward. See, you quickly learn that leaning your entire body is pretty pointless and only helps to throw off your balance. The real requirement is to simply shift your weight to different parts of the board. Even after learning this though, the lower sensitivity will cause you to quickly shift your weight around, which isn't exactly conducive to precision movement. But if you have something to steady yourself on, it'll make things astronomically easier. I was shocked by just how much the difficulty fell to pieces once I made this adjustment. I like to think I'm open-minded about strange control methods. I mean, I am a Nintendo fan. I even played through the game again, this time without the crutch. And yeah, with enough patience, I was able to get a somewhat reliable hold of my movement. But to say that this method was easy and intuitive rings even more hollow than with motion controls. As it turns out, piloting a precision platformer with the Wii balance board is about as good of an idea as it sounds. But wait, there's a glimmer of hope. The Wii balance board is actually optional. You heard that right, there's an alternate control method, that being the Wii remote. Just like before, you can simply tilt in your desired direction to move. And let me tell you, it was one of the biggest reliefs after my trials of the first playthrough. It made me somehow thankful to use the very control method I critiqued so much last time. In fact, you can probably notice in the gameplay just how much easier things became. Sure, the sensitivity is noticeably increased, making things look a bit jerky, but overall, it's like going from a tricycle to a bike. And that brings me to the stage design. But first, I'd like to quickly explain the story, because yes, there technically is one. Although it isn't told through any cutscenes, so you're simply left to read the manual. Basically, after saving the world, Aya and the gang are left with nothing to do and are now fat and lazy. Wow, me too! It's good to see Sega appealing to their core audience again. So Jam shows up to help them off the couch before it becomes indistinguishable from them. And thus an exercise program disguised as a trip around the world ensues. Okay, maybe that second part isn't as relatable. I mean, sure, maybe my calves and feet got pretty sore, but I think that's less due to the workout and more so due to aggressively shifting weight for several hours. But still, you could have definitely made some comedic animations for this, and it's a shame they didn't capitalize. That goes double when you consider the amount of animation Jam received. Anyway, at first glance, the stages mark a significant improvement because they head back toward the puzzle box design instead of the obstacle courses found in Banana Blitz and iOS 2. The time limit is now permanently capped at 60 seconds, and almost every gimmick from the last console game is gone. Enemies and bosses have vanished, character stats are removed, and even the jump was thankfully taken away. Presumably because II is canonically fat and lazy. What's more, portals and switches make a return from SMB2, the latter being used much more carefully here. The best use of these is in World 7, Siliconia, where you use switches to aim a ramp with a portal fixed to it. Then you build up enough speed to shoot through and jump a gap without over or undershooting, which is pretty easy to do. And once again, the lack of a jump means you have to find ways to clip edges of objects while maintaining control. Really, in terms of the design principles, I found little to complain about, aside from a small maze in World 3. Well, I'm feeling generous, so we'll give the game 3 strikes. Given how things are going though, you're probably waiting for me to point out something negative here. And I'm not one to disappoint if I can help it. You may have noticed with the footage already, but these stages are incredibly easy. It's pretty difficult to even fall off in World 1. And for comparison, the previous versions of Monkey Island had their fair share of opportunities, let alone the Jungle Island stages. At least you can feasibly die starting in World 2, but it's still a cakewalk. Well, as I briefly mentioned a little bit ago, everything is easy unless you're using the Wii balance board as intended. At that point, you're simply fighting to go in the direction you want. But for a series that lives and dies in part by its stage design, it's pretty sad to see it get handicapped for the sake of a predictably bad gimmick. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say that the stages are no longer the point of the game. Instead, it's just a means to an end to use this new technology. In that case, I will say again what I did about Banana Blitz. When you have to handicap the entire game to work around your selling point, it basically disproves itself. Now, you may wonder how things shake out with the Wiimote, pun intended. Well, using it sees some pretty drastic changes made. Due to the easier controls, the developers decided to use alternate versions of the stages. Or, more accurately, they added a bunch of obstacles to hinder your progress. And it's pretty obvious why. As I previously stated, with the default difficulty curve, completing all 7 worlds would be a cakewalk, so things needed to be a bit more challenging to keep the player engaged. The problem is that they do so in one of the worst ways possible. Now, before I lay into things too hard, I'll acknowledge that there are some clever or even devious uses throughout the levels. Some pillars might be added to block a narrow rail, leading you to find creative workarounds, or they might force you near a ledge, making things uncomfortable. But the vast majority of the time, they work against the stage design, or sometimes simply exist to waste your time. For example, they might block a route, forcing you to go along the wall to find the single opening. They also sometimes split a route in two, where one will just lead to a dead end. Or perhaps more iconically, they'll take a straightaway on which you're supposed to build up speed, then throw in a bunch of these pillars to block your way, forcing you to weave between them. That last one doesn't sound too bad, but it becomes predictable by the end. Every time an opportunity arises, they take it. Now, to be fair, most of them don't ruin their occupation. Often, they're just sitting in the middle of a path and you mindlessly move around, thinking nothing more of them. But the best way to sum the situation up is that these obstacles simply exist to drain a few seconds off the clock. Instead of adding meaningful or clever twists, they usually just prove a nuisance. Now, I agree that the difficulty should have been raised for the Wiimote, but you do that by altering the stages themselves. Make the paths narrower, or make the goal more difficult to reach. I hesitate to suggest it, but maybe even extend the stage when necessary. But piling a bunch of rocks for me to weave between comes across as lazy. So let's take a step back and look at this mode as a whole. It consists of a handful of worlds, each only 10 levels long, where the primary method of control is complete garbage. Thus, despite bearing a closer resemblance to the older style, the stages are made drastically easier. And the alternate control method not only disproves the concept of the primary, but also forces you to play a significantly inferior version of the game. It's just a flawed experience throughout. And I haven't even talked about the life system yet. At first glance, it's identical to how it was in Banana Blitz. The difference, though, is how it's used. Firstly, falling out is just called out of bounds, which will instantly earn it a second strike. But once again, although your life counter can reach 0, you have infinite continues to clear a world, with the only penalty being a score wipe. So clearing a world is even more trivial. Now sure, you will need to improve to get high scores, but there's no reward for that either, especially with the game once again being entirely offline. You know, I could see an ironic humor in competing worldwide using the Wii balance board of all things, but the developers said that such features would have to be left to a future possibility. Regardless, it makes this the worst version of the life system yet. At the very least, I could say that Banana Blitz would require completionists to crown worlds 1 through 9, which could prove quite difficult, but rewarding. But with that aspect missing, you might as well simply make a out of bounds, a point deduction. And while you're at it, you might as well not even include the bonus stages. If there's hardly any practical use for lives, there's no reason 10% of the already limited stage list should be dedicated to earning more. Once again, you could argue that they boost your score, but to that I say that inflating your score by giving you a bunch of free points is much less interesting than making you earn them through a normal stage. Now, sure, maybe you could revert to the old system, but I have a theory that the developers didn't want things to get too frustrating, which would certainly happen in later worlds if you lost your balance on stage 9 and got a game over, which once again proves that balance controls were probably a bad idea in the first place. But still, maybe limiting the number of continues would offset the problem a bit. With that said, we've pretty much covered the core mode, or as it's titled, single play. But of course that implies the existence of a multiplayer option. And there is, co-op play. Now, credit where it's due, it's a fresh idea. Up until now, there's only been various types of competitive offerings, when they've existed at all. So although it's a shame to not see that return, we at least have a new experience. However, that's where my praise for this mode ends. Instead of a split-screen or turn-based approach where you tackle a stage with two different characters, the second player is instead tasked with shooting projectiles to break obstacles on a stage. These differ from the ones that appear in the solo motion control mode because they often completely bar your progress. However, the assistant can only shoot a few bullets before having to shake their controller to reload, potentially eating into their time limit, which is not increased. I can see what the thought process was here, but I don't think it was the right path to take, mainly for two reasons. First, it's what is often called the younger sibling mode. Not many people would choose to be the assistant here any more than they would in something like Super Mario Galaxy. The developers stated their ideal scenario was a parent helping their child, but even then, I don't think either of them would be having fun for the second reason. With Monkey Ball as a series, movement is very spontaneous, with a camera that's pretty zoomed in and responsive to the player's direction. This means that the movement of the camera, while perfectly sensible to the one controlling it, can often feel quite sudden for the person firing projectiles. And there's no real way to communicate in such a short time frame. This in turn means that it becomes a lot more difficult for the assistant to remove the obstacles, since they require multiple shots to take out. And of course, spamming doesn't work due to the limited ammo. So it basically leads to a scenario where falling out of bounds or losing to the timer can feel unfair to both people involved. Besides the normal mishaps, player 1 can run into or bounce off of an obstacle that player 2 couldn't remove in time, who in turn feels like they couldn't do their job due to the camera swinging in different directions while they're trying to aim. So either the pair will blame each other, or more likely, decide the game just isn't a great multiplayer experience and decide to play competitive Luigi's Mansion 3 or something. Even in the proposed ideal scenario, I don't think anyone will be having much fun. By the way, the placement of these obstacles is consistent whether or not the Wii balance board is in use. So that leads to an additional hurdle with either the slower, frustratingly difficult, and often imprecise movement of balance controls, or the fast, more precise, but exceedingly shaky movement of motion controls. Either way, almost everything is working against anyone having fun, especially as the difficulty increases. By the time you reach the later worlds, all of these issues compound and even increase when different types of obstacles are introduced. Ice blocks slide away as they're damaged, eye rocks only expose themselves when viewed from the side, and robot heads have a rotating weak point. Now sure, there are ammo upgrades, but they aren't earned. They're simply handed out by the individual stages and entirely circumstantial. Needless to say, I don't think this mode turned out the best. In fact, my best experience was being both players at once, since I always knew where the camera would go. In fact, I think it would have been a neat experiment to tilt the stage with the nunchuck while removing obstacles with pointer controls. It couldn't have been the foundation for a full entry, but maybe an interesting side mode at least. Alas, we're basically just stuck with another dud of an idea here. It's okay though. Aside from the practice mode, there's one more offering from the main game selection: Marathon. As the name suggests, you either choose a 3-world half marathon or a full run-through of the 60 main levels, World 7 being considered extra and thus not included. This is probably the best option of the three because it's the closest to resembling the classic challenge mode from the originals. Now, there are a couple of ways in which this entry deviates from the idea. First and foremost, you have a single life and no continues. Yeah, a complete 180 in terms of brutality. In fact, requiring you to clear 5 dozen levels perfectly is, on paper at least, the biggest challenge in series history. Even expert in SMB 1 and 2 give you more leniency than that. But there are a couple details that leave things feeling a little underthought in execution. Firstly, if lives are removed, there's no longer a need for bananas, or especially bonus stages. Well, aside from score chasing, of course, but again, I'd rather they be replaced or even removed than have a good portion of the content you play be useless to your odds of success, especially when an entire world is omitted anyway. It may seem like a small problem, but if you're attempting this mode multiple times, as you will, believe me, you start questioning why you have to complete them. The second problem is that most of the background is completely removed, only leaving a simple colored tile pattern. I assume it's to help with loading times, but it's such a downgrade that I really wish they could have figured something out, especially when you consider the fact that this was not a problem with the originals. And 2 especially had some pretty intricate scenery. Maybe not as much level geometry, but that's not exactly a strength here. Now, another problem that fits into the category of cool on paper but not in practice is the level transitions themselves. Both the replay and the level overview are skipped, which is good, but you also keep your speed between levels, meaning you have to keep in mind how fast you're heading toward the goal. This would be fine if not for the fact that several later levels start you close to a ledge, meaning that if you're not thinking ahead, you could speed through a goal too quickly and immediately fall out of bounds. And again, one mistake means the entire run is over. You've also got to keep in mind that some of these time limits are fairly strict, meaning that you may be pressed for time as you approach the end. So you either risk slowing down and ending your run by timing out, or speed up and risk getting flung off the preceding course. So as cute of an idea as it is, I would have excluded the feature. Still, despite these 3 issues, a full marathon is the closest this game gets to greatness, and many of its issues are simply a problem of the game it's in. But I'm glad of the inclusion regardless. Thus far, I've been pretty negative on this game, so let's take a second to list some things I appreciate. First, while the world themes are pretty generic, they like to throw in occasional wrinkles. The desert world is an excavation site of an ancient civilization, for example. Don't get me wrong, it's not competing with 2 in terms of creativity, but it did try. Even the world map has some cute touches. The ocean area is called the Chimpanzee, which might just be the best name I've ever heard. When Siliconia is unlocked, a little animation of it plays where it slowly rises out of the water. And Magma Valley's description once again implies that we are fat and lazy. Another trifle I like is that stage names return for the first time since Adventure. But if we're talking about completely new additions, then I have to mention the collection. This game's version of achievements. There's some standard ones like playing for a certain amount of time or getting a certain score, but my favorites are the special bananas hidden in each world. Some are placed better than others, but they were fun to look for. Apparently completing the board turns the in-game bananas golden, but I couldn't get the game to give me the last few items. Speaking of rewards though, there is one more significant option you can toggle after clearing World 6, Mirror Mode. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't know why it's here since it makes no material difference to things. But if the intention was to add a low-effort New Game Plus feature, I don't mind at all. And before we wrap up the main game, let's briefly mention the credits. Basically, each letter of the staff names falls onto a tilting board. Simply guide as many letters to the holes as possible without allowing them to fall off the edge. Personally, I prefer the previous games, but it's still a fun addition. I just wish I wasn't listening to Kids Bop. Plus, it's a bit of a dubious choice to include it after just 10 levels. If you don't elect to skip them, the credits can be just as long as the world itself. To summarize the main game, there are some improvements from Banana Blitz, but they're buried under so many other issues that it almost doesn't matter. Sure, there is some stuff more reminiscent of 2, but when you're playing on the Wii balance board or dodging a bunch of obstacles littered all over the place, it's hard to enjoy these aspects. Movement should never be an issue with Monkey Ball. In fact, while other series might get away with changing the movement from game to game, it's one of the few key components of this series. There are no power-ups or skill trees, no tech except what you make yourself. If the stage design is poor, that can certainly hurt the game. But if the very act of moving is poor, the game is broken on a fundamental level. Sure, I can use my crutch method to make the experience smoother, but that clearly is not how the game was meant to be played. Balance controls are simply as bad as they sound, and thus every mode and aspect of the main game is flawed as a result. At the very least, some ideas had merit. I just wish those ideas weren't wasted on an entry that didn't seem to have much hope to begin with. But wait, maybe this game can be redeemed. After all, it's time to look at the party games. And there's only 21 this time, which is a much more manageable number than 50. I hope I don't regret this. Let's go through every minigame with my quick opinions on each. Balloon race. Either pump your Wiimote up and down or your foot against the board to inflate a hot air balloon. The higher you fly, the faster you'll go. But you also have to watch out for birds, which will gun you down. Does it work? Yes. Is it a good experience? Not really. There's just no substance at all. Battle pinball. Shift your weight or flick your remote and nunchuck to work the flippers in your corner of the board. Then try to aim the simian encasing projectiles at your opponent's corners. Surprisingly, the balance controls work well here, probably more so than motion. And what with the multiple players and power-ups, this is actually a pretty fun time. Firefighter. Pump water with either the board or the nunchuck while aiming your hose with the pointer. It's definitely easier using the latter because constantly shifting your weight will make your aim pretty shaky, but maybe that's the point. Either way, put out the fires as quickly as possible to maximize your score. Once again, does it work? Sure, but I'm never going on my way to pick it due to the lack of depth. Fruit basket. Appearing for a third time now, this one is mostly untouched, aside from the addition of balance controls. Simply lean in the direction of the basket you wish to direct fruit to. Given the similarities, my opinion is basically unchanged. In other words, the Flash port was better. Hovercraft battle. Another returning one, this game is also untouched, save for the background. And of course, one of the players can use the balance board to control the 4 engines. Simply shift weight to your toes or heel on the side you wish to control. Once again, it's a faithful translation, and I'd even say things feel less slippery now, but I would have preferred the arena to be a bit bigger. Otherwise, it's decent. Hovercraft race. Well, I suppose one comes with the other, and my opinion is basically the same. The controls are more functional than before. That being said, with everything being more or less identical, I still would never choose to pick this one up. Hurdle race. I would not have predicted this one would come back. It's as much of a waggle fest as it was before, unless you opt to use balance controls, in which case you pump your feet in turn as if running. To jump, shift your weight to your toes. The biggest thing holding the controls back is that the board wasn't actually designed to be stepped on, so anything more than this was infeasible. But in that case, they made a worse control scheme to a game that was already basically a button masher. I just don't see the point. Jump rope. Yet another game returning from Banana Blitz, only with a change of scenery. Because when I'm on a narrow cliff, my first instinct is to play jump rope. Anyway, the Wiimote players are at a serious advantage. While they simply have to flick their wrist, the balance board scheme requires you to stand on your toes to jump. However, in my experience, it often doesn't respond. I don't know how they expected people to play once the rope speeds up, when I struggled to even get 1 point. Ladder climb. You know, there's a Mario Party minigame very similar to this. Climb a tall ladder by mimicking either a stepping or climbing motion. Then simply lean to the side to dodge falling rocks. You also have to watch out for birds, which will occasionally cross your path and knock you down. Once again, it works fine enough, but I don't see why you would choose this one, especially since there's a pretty clear score cap if you have the patience. Luge. Slide down a tunnel, speeding up during straightaways and leaning into turns to get the best time. This is probably one of the most distinct uses of the balance board here, as it requires you to actually sit on it and physically lean to mimic your in-game motions. It's a cool, if fleeting, novelty. Unfortunately, the sensitivity feels off, and in general, the player using this scheme is going to be at a disadvantage to any other players who just have to tilt the remote down or sideways. The speed difference is usually very noticeable. Monkey Race. It's never been the best minigame, but I'm sad to say it's never been worse. Firstly, the controls are awful, no matter which method you choose. On paper, nothing should be wrong here. On the board, just lean in your desired directions and squat to use items. Meanwhile, the Wiimote controls are the same from Banana Blitz. However, the turning radius is so bad that anything outside of a 90-degree window is nigh impossible. This in turn causes 2 fundamental issues. Firstly, the courses are even more simplified than ever. Admittedly, the originals didn't have great designs, often having annoying hazards, but they did have legitimately challenging aspects to them. Here, while the shapes aren't terrible, they're constantly walled, meaning the only way to fall off is either to miss a jump or to get hit by an item. Now, of course, that does happen often enough, but I think it's worth noting. Secondly, making major corrections to your movement is almost impossible without dash pads. For example, if you get stopped and gravity pulls you in the reverse direction, there's almost nothing you can do once the camera follows. Also worth noting is that there are only 3 courses this time. Great. Monkey Snowboard. I can understand why they brought this back. It is one of the less disappointing minigames from the last Wii title, and has a direct translation to the Wii balance board. In fact, the sport was one of the most notable demonstrations Nintendo had previously used. However, it's not nearly as seamless an experience in practice. The problem is simple. The turning feels very awkward when using balance controls, meaning the person simply tilting their Wiimote will be at a major advantage. And when you're constantly getting flung off your board, it makes the minigame last longer than desirable. At least it's good for a workout. My legs were pretty sore by the end of the 3rd course. Monkey Target. I may have had a different opinion than most concerning Banana Blitz's version, but I'll probably conform here. This one leaves a lot to be desired. The air physics feel awful. In fact, landing on the target itself is a challenge, let alone passing through the bonus ring the game throws at you. Now, of course, if it was a problem of managing your altitude and watching the wind like the classics, then it wouldn't be a problem. But it just feels like once you swoop down, there's no going back. And with the removal of the second ball you carry from before, you're left with an addition with next to no depth. Honestly, it's a shame because the balance controls work well enough for the most part. Obviously, I prefer pretty much every other scheme we've seen, but it would have been manageable. Ninja Stomp. Shurikens, bombs, and coins will continuously fly towards you, and your objective is to raise or lower a mat to protect yourself. This is done by either applying pressure to the balance board or tilting the remote. However, I again found the balance board to be more accurate. Otherwise, it's pretty unremarkable. Red light, green light. You know, last time I mocked this one for requiring an accessory, and now I suppose that statement is more true than ever. Funnily enough, the balance board is once again the better control method. For some reason, the Wiimote and Nunchuck will always detect motion, even when they're statue still. But it almost doesn't matter because I'm mostly wondering what motivated them to reskin one of the lowest effort minigames from before. How many minigames weren't recycled this time just because they couldn't use balance controls? Seesaw Ball. I'm starting to get really tired of these rehashed distractions. You may be surprised to hear me say that, considering I actually liked this one previously. But the problem is that the concept was already explored in Tip and Tilt 1 and 2. So reskinning the prototype just leaves me wanting, and giving me the option to lean back and forth on the board just isn't cutting it. Of course they couldn't include 20 plus levels, but this just begs the question of whether they should have brought it back at all. Skydiving. Either using balance or motion controls, tilt left and right to aim your monkey to line up with the silhouette and join the formations. You can also tilt or lean forward and backward to manage your descent. My favorite mechanic here is that there's no fixed time limit. Each time you match, you earn extra time along with points. So the faster you can reach your goal without falling out of formation, the more opportunities you have to raise your score. Now, where have I seen that idea before? My only other note is that seeing Ai's ears flutter like that makes me realize they aren't using any protection at all. That's gotta be causing some kind of damage. Spaceship landing. Well, it's back for a second time, and it still hasn't found a justification for its own existence. Sure, the background is different, but nothing else has changed. It still lasts less than 30 seconds, is incredibly easy, and offers no variation between playthroughs. And no, balance controls don't count as a difference. The only change is that instead of tilting the remote, you lean in your desired direction. Whether you use this new scheme or not though, it still feels like a waste of time to play it more than once. Spinning top attack. Twirl your wrist or hips to build up speed, then lean or tilt in the desired direction to run into your opponents. This one is alright once you know the quirks of the game. There's no big animation for when you're charged, except for a small power bar on the bottom, which doesn't immediately drain upon contact like you'd expect. Does it feel great to control? Not really, but it's still exciting. Starlight Swing. Definitely one of the more forgettable games here. This one sees you swinging back and forth to collect stars while swinging off of the moon. It's somewhat of a bizarre concept, but I get the impression that's on purpose. Like, this is a dream the characters are having. Regardless, the controls are simple, with the balance board user shifting their weight left and right, and anyone else swinging their remote. Besides raising or lowering your rope, that's all there is here. In other words, it's completely disposable. At the end, a simple point system decides the winner, and you swiftly move on to something else. Sumo Smash. Alright, this is definitely the most memorable one here, for better or worse. Two players face off against each other in a battle of might, trying to whittle down their opponent's stamina and knock them off a stump using only the power of their glutes. Hey wait, baby's cheating! Get off that robot and take your medicine. However, you do have the option to play defensively by pushing your hips forward. If your rival attacks you when you're in this state, they'll lose balance, giving you a vital opening. Unfortunately, that's all the complexity here, leading to a pretty stale experience if both people know what they're doing. It's not like the swordplay in Wii Sports Resort where there is always an angle you can attack at. Here, your vulnerability is binary, so it basically turns into a game of chicken. At least the ending is fun. If you knock out your opponent while they're off balance, you'll perform a final smash that knocks your opponent into the distance. Admittedly, I can see why kids would see this as a funny inclusion. But I'll admit, I probably wouldn't choose to return to this one, if only for the awkward undertones. Maybe I've just seen too many mobile game ads, but I can't think of any self-respecting franchise that would include this. And that goes double for the controls. It gets pretty uncomfortable when one person is simply tilting the remote while the other is vigorously thrusting on the balance board. With that interesting inclusion, we've now finished the minigames. I'll admit, I left feeling more positive on the whole than last time. The quality control was generally better, though perhaps that's to be expected with less than half of Banana Blitz's count. I will say though that there still seemed to be a lot of filler or repeated content. In fact, out of the 21 total, 11 of these minigames are either significantly or almost entirely recycled. Of course, I don't mind if an idea is brought back like Monkey Race or Target, but only if they make a discernible change. Otherwise, I'll just play the original. With those ones in particular, it's unfortunate because they're markedly worse. Now obviously the main appeal with all of these is the use of the balance board, but not only do you have to recalibrate it every time players switch out, but often the two schemes are poorly balanced. Even if everything works as intended, people will probably just want to grab a controller for simplicity's sake. Now, if we look at these games beside the balance controls, most of them are harmless enough, but none have any serious staying power. Outside of maybe 5 of them, almost all of these things mark a difference in game design that started with Banana Blitz. They prioritize quick and unique experiences over anything else. But as I already noted last time, many of these games have neither the length or depth to serve any real purpose. And it's also why there were comparatively few in the originals. Either there needed to be more substance to each game here, or there needed to be some kind of marathon mode. Banana Blitz half committed to this idea, but maybe make a multi-round competition mode, sort of like Nintendo Land's Attraction Tour. That way, even if the minigames would be the same, they would each play a role in a larger context. Plus, it would give people the opportunity to switch out using the balance board. But as it is, free play just doesn't give enough reason to play Firefighter or Ladder Climb on their own. Very few people will be likely to play this entry at their game night, regardless of Sumo Smash. Super Monkey Ball Step and Roll is truly an anomaly, attempting to marry the designs of the classic era and Banana Blitz, while also throwing in the novelty of the Wii balance board. As a result, the game certainly has a charm that makes me want to like it more than I do. Even looking back, I definitely can name some aspects that I like. The UI is aesthetically clean, with the menus being a massive improvement. The music, minus the lyrical versions, are catchy and add to the game's character. They even got another brand deal, though it wasn't with Dole this time, but Chiquita, grounds for a third strike if I've ever seen one. And in the main game, there are several modes to try, but these are simply bright spots in a murky field of questionable decisions. The dearth of levels means there's little content to go back to. It's incredibly easy, with one of the hardest levels resembling a beginner stage from SMB1, and this decrease in difficulty is caused by a control scheme that never feels comfortable. And when you try to switch to the alternate option, the difficulty is raised artificially. This means that regardless of the other mode's merits, they could never truly succeed either. The story, while goofy, is purely constrained to a couple sentences in the manual and has no actual bearing on the game itself. And on the minigame side of things, while quality has improved on a per-game average, none of them are worth playing more than a couple times at most, with no substance to encapsulate the experience. Anywhere I look here, I find squandered effort, stuff that's a victim of the game it's in, or more succinctly, a victim of balance controls. Titled Super Monkey Ball Athletic in Japan, perhaps it was aiming to get people moving, but unless you're playing for hours at a time, I don't think that's the most accurate descriptor. Perhaps the best analogy I could give this game is a runner that trained for months, ate a good diet, and stayed hydrated, only to go out on a racetrack and wear lead shoes. They may have raised a valiant effort in some aspects, but in the end, they only have themselves to blame for losing the race. But how was this game received at the time? Well, critics were generally of a similar mind, with scores covering a decently wide range, depending on how much they weighed the problem of the balance board. Pun once again intended. That's funny, I thought they said the controls were intuitive. But the sales were far from desirable. In fact, the game sold so poorly, no numbers were officially reported. Still, failure is a part of life, and for what it's worth, the game did make an effort to change some aspects from Banana Blitz. And with a series like this one, you would be hard-pressed to say what it would try next. Who knows? It would only take one game to get the series back on track. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.